back on camera. If you remember Ben from our earlier rounds, Ben is playing a straight two-color aggro deck here. It is white-red aggro. He has a very light splash of green for, get this, 2 Woolly Loxodon.
Sure, so, you have a morph in the worst case scenario, and if you happen to draw one of your green sources of mana, you can have a card that's good in the late game and probably very surprising against an opponent who's just playing with mostly mountains and plains.
And he's playing against Braun-Duin, who is on a teamer deck here. And we have seen a lot of 5-color on camera today. What I like about Brian's deck is the amount of discipline here that's in it. Ben, last time we saw him on camera, was really able to defeat his 5-color opponent on the back of consistency and mana problems from his opponent's side. I believe he played against Chris Fennell. And as we see here, with Smoke Teller from Brian and an Einok Bondkin from Ben, Brian's actually able to keep pace with this curve a lot better than some of the clunkier decks have been able to.
The Smoke Teller is going to be really important for Brian in this game, even if, its power to look at morphs never really comes up, because Ben's going to try to put him under the gun early and as quickly as he possibly can, and early plays from Brian are really critical to make sure he doesn't get outpaced.
Yeah, Einok Bondkin hits back for 2, and you see the consistency here in Brian's deck. He 3 lands in, and he already has all his colors in the quantity of 2. He has double blue, double red, double green already.
So as far as the marquee gold cards here in Brian's list, you're looking at a Bear's Companion, an Avalanche Tusker, and an Ice Feather Aven, and a Teamer Charm. So not a lot of gold cards, but a lot of power there.
Yeah, he does look like he's a solid 3-color deck. He's not based in any of the other 2, but he has enough mana fixing to consistently play these 3 colors. We saw a morph from Ben. Right now, Ben's board was 3 planes, so it opts to trade more for Smoke Teller, which is the humorous, the Woolly Loxodon here.
Well, Brian got to scope out the action at the end of Ben's last turn with the Smoke Teller, so he knew that morph wasn't going to get unmorphed anytime in the near future, and so Brian can make the attack, and because Ben knows he can't trick him, then, might as well just get the block on.
Yeah, Brian passes with 4 mana up. He's going to weave Fate on Ben's end step. Ben had the option of swinging for 2, but instead decided to outlast the Bondkin, turning it into a 3/2 first strike.
And this is shaping up to be a pretty slow game here, so I like Ben using that opportunity to outlast.
And the 2-color aggro decks, remember, they're not the most powerful in the format. They are trying to capitalize on stumbles of any sorts from their opponent, but actually this time it's Ben's deck that's stumbling. He's missing the land and missing a color.
I will say, sitting in Ben's seat, you're saying to yourself, I built a 2-color deck and I can't get my mana online in this format?
Yeah, he has 15 basics, which is far more than anyone else we've seen today. Bloodfire Expert was the play from Brian. So looking at Brian's side, his creatures aren't exactly all-stars either. This 3/1 is unable to block Einok Bondkin, so Brian will go to 16.
Yeah, it's not a great cast of characters here in Brian's deck. One of the noteworthy creatures here, 1,000 Winds, and this is a game shaping up where 1,000 Winds could be very powerful just being cast as small Hamodi Dijin, or possibly morphing and unmorphing if Ben's able to get a board going.
Yeah, 1,000 Winds, one of the top single-colored rares in the set.
Yeah, very high in power, easy to cast, and one morph that can catch you up from some pretty dire situations.
Yeah, and if what's one thing I've learned from watching our Opens, the whole Grand Prix this today, is that were I to decide what I wanted to open in my pool, I think I would start to lean toward these 1-color bombs, like these High Sentinels of Arashan, these 1,000 Winds, Crater's Claws, as opposed to some of the higher impact 3-color cards. And we see here, Force Away was going to be cast on the Watcher of the Roost from Ben, and then Ben cast when he was trying to reveal it with Smite the Monstrous.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason here is Brian just wants to loot, and he does get to loot because of the way the Prowess trigger works. The Prowess trigger resolves, then when the spell resolves, it checks to see if Brian has a creature with power 4 or greater. It does from the Prowess trigger. Another factor here, I think Ben may have to discard a hand size. Oh, it appears not. He kept it 7.
Swing from Bloodfire Expert puts deals 3 to Ben here, and Brian will play a morph of his own. So Brian, with the mana advantage to be sure, looks like he's flooding out a bit, but he's had enough on the board that it may not matter. And 4th land from Ben, but it is still a Plains. And on all white cards, all white lands, Ben actually still has access to a lot of his hand. We did see that Smite the Monstrous and the Watcher of the Roost that he tried to morph last turn. And he'll go ahead and cast a morph again, probably the same Watcher.
I like just trying to redevelop the board rather than sitting on a trick here. And Ben's still at a high life total, so no big rush.
And he does have a trick. In addition to the Smite the Monstrous, he has a Feat of Resistance in his hand.
Though I do not believe with the requisite mana.
No, right now it just has 1 white. So Bondkin will swing again. And despite being very underdeveloped, Ben keeping pace on the life totals.
The Bondkin is just an excellent threat. No two ways about it. Good on turn 2, and then in games like this that are a little awkward, a little slowly paced, you know, only 1 activation of Outlast, and then you have a threat that's very difficult to block.
All right, we'll go over to Brian's turn. Needs just 1 high impact play. You know, you really hope that this morph is something like a Snowhorn Rider, or even if Brian has a Woolly Loxodon, just something like that would go a long way in helping Brian out in this game.
Yeah, he does have a Woolly Loxodon. There is no Snowhorn Rider in his list, unfortunately, for Brian.
7th land for him. And he's going to swing. It looks like Mardu Heartpiercer is going to be the play here.
And that's a great play for Brian here to re-seize the tempo of the game. You know, he wasn't really able to block the first striker, assuming that's the face down morph as a flyer again. He's not going to be able to block that, and this is a critical play.
Yep, had the option between hitting the morph and the Bondkin. He's going to hit the Bondkin. That was the creature that was dealing the damage anyway.
And if Brian's hitting the Bondkin here, it implies the morph he has face down is something not that powerful. Not something that can get in front of a 3-power first striker.
Well, there was every indication that it's just Watcher of the Roost again. That was the morph that Ben had gone for the previous turn.
No, I mean the morph on Brian's side of the table.
Sure.
It implies that he can't block a 3-2 first striker, which means there may be something really wrong with his hand right now.
Yeah, looking at some of the morphs that he does have in his deck. And a lot of them, you know, are cards like Inoc Tracker, 3-3 first striker, things that are not particularly impactful. And I actually believe that may be the only, outside of Thousand Winds, that may be the only morph in his deck.
Yes, yeah, Woolly Loxodon.
Okay, 3.
So, yeah.
Right here. So we're back on Brian's turn. He's going to swing with both Expert and Heartpiercer. Ben could go for a Feat of Resistance. He could try to cast Smite the Monstrous. Certainly if Brian plays a spell to pump the Bloodfire Expert, that would work.
And this looks a little dangerous on the surface of it, but because Brian elected not to send in with the morph, it probably implies that his hand doesn't have a lot of ways to push through in combat right now.
Yeah, you look at it, it is just lands right now. Brian has to do with the creatures make do with the creatures he has.
Well, I believe Brian may have a Water Whirl in his hand, but this is not a great situation to be using that card. But there are 2 lands.
All right, counter will go on it. See if Brian will move toward damage. And it looks like he's going to use up that Water Whirl you're talking about. You might see him bounce the Heartpiercer as well.
Yeah, that seems pretty attractive.
Certainly he'll bounce this Watcher of the Roost. It is unfortunate for Brian. Ben will get to gain the life off it. Yeah, Brian will bounce both the 2 creatures.
And I would imagine Ben here is going to take an opportunity to reveal something. And it looks like the Smite that he revealed the previous time. It's just gain 2 life on the way back.
Yep, so the Watcher of the Roost will go back to Ben's hand along with Brian's Mardu Heartpiercer. Will make the Watcher a little more difficult to recast if Ben wants to go for that next turn.
And Ben knowing about the Heartpiercer in Brian's hand really influences the way he's going to block going forward. He's not going to allow Brian to attack and leave himself with a 2 toughness or less creature on the way back after combat resolves if he can at all avoid it. So Ben's behind the curve anyway because of his land situation. And I think even more so he's going to be inclined to block now to try to mitigate the damage that Heartpiercer can do as much as possible.
Yeah, he plays Mardu Horde Chief this turn, something that can't be Heart-pierced. And it's a rough situation here for Ben. He still doesn't have red. He has a full 7-card grip. Among the cards hanging out in his hand are Arc Lightning. Certainly a card that had he drawn it last turn would have been quite the play.
Yes.
Or Chief, just as a 2-3. We'll see whether or not Ben wants to just trade it for that Bloodfire Expert. And I am wondering what the morph is on Brian's side. You know, he said Wooly Loxodon, Inoc Tracker, and 1,000 Winds really are the options. I'd think if it was anything but the Tracker, Brian would have already unmorphed it.
Yeah, I guess the other one is Ice Feather Aven, but it felt like, you know, Brian's had opportunities to use that card for good value here earlier too.
He probably wouldn't have Water World there. He would have used the Aven.
It seems likely, but...
Bloodfire Expert will trade with Mardu Horde Chief. And Heart Piercer will be cast by Brian just to deal 2 upstairs. But his next draw is a real good one. It's Bear's Companion.
Yeah, Brian now trying to close the game out. No point in just playing the Bear's Companion into an opponent where you know they have Smite of the Monstrous in hand. So just, again, trying to close out this game before Ben draws out.
And it looks like Ben didn't hit, and this should be enough.
And there are 9 mountains in Ben's list. This is pretty crazy. Only 6 planes.
Yeah, he's... He's 9-8 in favor of red. He has 2 non-basics that are both white non-basic lands. They're white-green Blossoming Sands. That bear token, I like that one.
It is.
It is.
The little bear themes in the set are really funny.
Yes.
That's just all there is to it.
Smite the Monstrous to cast from Ben. It takes out the bear token. Brian has 0 cards right now to Ben's 7. Looks like it's another land from Brian. And I wonder if, you know, Ben's going to go to 4 here, maybe lower.
It is 1,000 win, is the morph. Brian just took a look at it. Now, the thing is, normally in these spots, you're saying to yourself, well, can I, you know, sandbag this bomb so he doesn't know about it for the next game? But the morph has to get revealed regardless at the end of the game. So the only question here is, does Brian want to turn this into a 5/6 flyer now? Or does he, you know, is he willing to just attack this turn and have access to 1,000 win as some insurance policy against a removal spell or a sweeper?
He's going to swing all 3, put Ben down to 4, and he may just pass the turn.
What I really like about this play from Brian is the only thing that Ben can really do in this spot to catch up is play a land and play an end hostilities. At that spot, Brian can then unmorph the 1,000 wins, return the 2 creatures he has attacking back to his hand, and then you have something to rebuild with.
Yeah, brainstorming the cards that he could actually lose to. There is not an end hostilities in Ben's deck. Brian does not know that, of course, and plays around it. We see a morph on Ben's side. That should just be lethal on board here as Brian can attack.
See, the alternative play that Brian had last turn was unmorphing and attacking for 9. That would have only put Ben down to 1. So if Ben then draws a land and casts end hostilities, Brian could suddenly lose this game very easily. So showing a lot of discipline and giving himself a very powerful insurance policy against the 1 card he's most worried about.
Not to mention the 2 cards that Brian will be bouncing are Mardu Heart Piercer and Bear's Companion.
It's a good squad. That's not a bad squad to bring back.
And end step, he's going to just flip up the 1,000 wins. I think he's going to bounce the 2 creatures. He bounces both his own guys. And this is a 5/6 flyer. Should be good enough.
Yeah, the only thing Ben could have here is a Watcher of the Roost to chump block. And then again, Brian gets to rebuild quite a bit.
Yeah, the 5/6 swings in. If you're Ben, I'm not even sure you want to flip up the Watcher of the Roost. You'd have to show another white card, which may just be more than I'd want to do. Ben's going to do it, though. Watcher of the Roost showing Master of Pearls. That's a pretty big reveal.
Yeah, Ben must feel like he can still win this game if he's willing to reveal that card. I mean, if he revealed, you know, some random creature, maybe a below average combat trick, whatever, but that's significant information for Brian in the next game.
Yeah, Master of Pearls turns up. So Ben goes to 6. His Watcher of the Roost chumps.
And this is the flip side. If your opponent's willing to show you Master of Pearls there, you have to believe that they're playing this game for some reason. It implies even further that Ben could have end hostilities in his deck. So even though this play looks really straightforward for Brian and, oh, what are you thinking about? Just cast the stuff in your hand? Ben's given up a significant amount of information for the following games. So it makes you feel like he must have some reason to play on.
Yeah, he does finally hit his mountain. But at 6, and he's facing down 11 power, he'll need something big. He'll need to kill 2 creatures.
Yeah.
Which really makes me think it's end hostilities or nothing, but he doesn't have an end hostilities in his deck.
Which makes sense. He's playing a 2-color beatdown deck. Even if he had end hostilities, it's not clear it would go into his deck.
Yeah. And he'll cast the Master of Pearls.
My understanding is this is the second time we've seen this cast face up this weekend.
Yes.
I would have lost that bet.
And Arc Lightning will 2-1, putting Brian to 12. And Master of Pearls can chump block that bear. But the problem is that Ben knows that Brian has a Mardu Heart Piercer. This is Ben. So there you go. Game goes to Brian with Braun-Duin. By casting both Arc Lightning and Master of Pearls, those are both cards that I think you'd want to play around.
I understand the urge to keep on fighting. You know, you want to try you're playing a match on camera. You're 6-1, trying to lock up a spot in day 2, but Ben gave up a lot of information playing a pretty hopeless game there, and Brian's got to be really happy with how that shaped up. Not only did he win the game, but he got to see a lot of valuable surprise cards out of Ben's deck.
All right, well, let's go ahead and look at some of the things that they can do to adapt. One of the weaknesses of playing a 2-color aggro deck, especially in sealed, is that you typically have very few sideboard cards available to you. The cards that Ben's not running, he can board into a Rush of Battle, a War Behemoth, maybe a couple Swift Kicks, and that's about it.
So the other side, Brian does have some options to speed up his deck a little bit. He can bring in the Wetland Sandbar. He's also playing, he also has an embodiment of Spring in his sideboard. Not something you commonly see in blue-green sideboards, but Brian is not starting it in his deck here. And even if he doesn't want to play it because maybe he doesn't have blue mana reliably on the first turn or green mana reliably on the second turn, being an 0-3 blocker against an opponent who's trying to beat you down can be really nice on top of the mana acceleration.
Yeah, he even has Barrage of Boulders in his sideboard. That's a card that deals 1 damage to each creature. That effect could be decent against Ben's deck, actually.
Saw a fair number of one-toughness, though, again, he's sort of guessing.
Right.
Because he saw so little. And it's hard to assume that your opponent's playing 2 colors in this format in the sealed portion. I mean, that's pretty much impossible.
You know, looking at Brian's list, it's really easy to see how he wasn't particularly happy with it when you were saying he has green in his deck, and his green is basically for 2 Smoke Tellers and 2 Highland game. That's typically the vanilla 2-1s and 2-2s aren't things you want to be doing in sealed, but they've served Brian pretty well today.
Well, the gold cards he has are all green, and they're pretty solid. A Temur Charm, an Ice Feather Aven, a Bear's Companion, and an Avalanche Tusker. So those are good payoffs for going into the 3rd color. But in terms of monocolor cards, he is very light on green, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and more just a lot of them are cards that don't scale well into the later parts of the game.
Right. Though I do like Brian's matchup here. I think if Ben was playing against, a 5-color control deck, he'd be really capitalizing on their slow starts. Brian's not that much slower than Ben, and he does have the 2 copies of Smoke Teller and the 2 copies of Highland Game to shore up his early game. And then later on, he's bringing a lot more power to the table than Ben is with his 3-color cards.
I mean, a lot of this plays out in the same way. I'm going to throw a constructed analogy here, is that these 5-color decks we're seeing from players, a lot of times are operating on like the Jund philosophy, where it's, I'm going to play a bunch of duels, and every card I play is going to be really good, and if I survive and I play enough cards, I'm going to 2-for-1 you and win. And a good way to beat Jund has always been to, the mono-red aggro decks. Just play dudes and hit them.
Yeah, depending on the specific nature of their deck, what exact cards they're bringing to the table. But when people are messing around for too long, you can try to overpower them, which may or may not be possible depending on the exact cards they're bringing to the table, or you can try to go underneath them.
All right, so if you think about these 5-color decks as the Jund and Ben's white-red aggro deck as the aggro deck, well, then Brian's deck becomes like the mid-range deck of the format, or, your green-white aggro, your like Naya mid-range deck of the format, where you're only playing 3 colors, you're pretty consistent, you have creatures, they're bigger than the little red creatures. They're not all that good against the deck that's playing all the kill spells, because you can't deploy things fast enough, but you're good against the small decks and a little weaker against the big decks.
It's good to be, for the most part, slightly bigger than your opponents in draft and sealed. And I think it's part of the reason Brian has a nice matchup here, is he is a little bit slower and slightly bigger than Ben, so as long as he doesn't get raced out too quickly, he should still have cards, maybe they're not as powerful as the 5-color deck, but they're still contextually powerful, much more powerful than what Ben's doing, and he should be able to win the match that way.
Yeah, and Brian has plenty of 2-drops in his deck. That's something these 5-color decks certainly have not. Their 2-drop has been a second tapped land.
Yeah, so it is a very solid matchup for Brian. I don't know how his deck stacks up against the powerful decks in the format.
That would be my worry.
He is light on power himself, but in this kind of matchup, he's very well suited, I think.
What he does have out of his sideboard, and this is still a little bit of a Hail Mary, is he does have a full 3 cancels in his sideboard. So maybe if he's playing against those decks, he can throw down some 2-1s for 2 and a bunch of cancels and ride the creatures in.
Yeah, he does have that option, but That is tough.
A lot of things can go wrong there.
His deck's not even that blue dense, so I don't know if cancel is even that reliable of a cast for him.
No, and there's a lot of things. He's playing 2 Weave Fates, for example. He did have to scrape a bit for the sealed pool.
Yes. To put it generously, yes. But here he is at 6-1. Very impressive, when we watch people and they're running, going XO, X1 with very powerful sealed pools, we sort of say, well, that's good. They had to play well at least, but the deck took care of a lot of it for them. But when you're doing it with the underpower cards, it's very impressive here. Now Ben going to 5 cards. Brian in a great position to lock up a spot in day 2.
Yeah, I believe Ben most likely chose the play here as well. So Brian will be +3 cards on him. In limited, that can be a lot harder to come back from, I think, than it is in constructed.
Yeah, though Ben's deck is about, if you're going to mulligan to 5 with any deck, it's going to be one that can go 2-drop, 3-drop, and hope to win that way.
There's a couple things. You'd either want a 2-drop, 3-drop deck, I would think, or something that could play a real nice wall early on and then just sit behind it.
Yeah. So Ben's got draws, but you got to have some sympathy for him there. 2-color deck, color screwed in the 5-color format, or 4-color format game 1, and now on 5 cards game 2. But still appears to be in very good spirits, which is nice.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even on 5 cards, like you said, the right draw can get there. He does have a few cards that can get him back that tempo. Maybe a well-placed Arc Lightning, for example, could go a long way toward getting him this game.
Yeah, that is a source of card advantage he has.
It's like card and tempo, which I think would be the 2 things he would need.
And now on 4.
And then again, he could just not draw lands or draw. I mean, I would even keep 5 lands, actually. I was going to say he could draw all lands, but no, 5 lands, I think, on the play on a Moldo 5 is probably a keeper.
Yeah, I think 4 cards hands, it's so hard to win.
Your ideal 4-card hand, I think, is 4 lands. 3, maybe 3 and 3 into 2-drop.
I don't know if I've ever won on 4 cards in limited in my life.
I pulled it off the other day, actually. But it's the first time in a year or so, and I play limited almost every week.
Okay.
Which, no, it's hard. In constructed, you can win on mulls to 4 because you can have strategies that just don't care about card advantage a lot of the time. You can win the game on 5 card with these 5 cards before your opponent can answer them. These things are possible, but in most limited games, the strategies really don't afford that.
It's hard for the games to be played in such a way where the resources we have don't collide at some point. In games like constructed, especially in formats like Modern and Legacy, that happens all the time. But it's really hard unless you're talking about creatures that can't be blocked, hexproof creatures, sometimes flyers. It's tough. It's tough to not interact, which is a great part about limited, but it definitely makes these mulligans really, really rough for Ben.
And we'll see if he can get a game going here on a 4-card hand.
Give me a plane, a mountain, and Enoch Bonkin, and
another land.
And Abzan Falconeer. Give me those.
All right, we'll start on planes. Frontier Bivouac is the play from Brian. And Ben kept a 1-lander, so we'll miss for a turn. How fast can Brian put the pressure down? Answer looks to be pretty fast. It's Highland game from Brian. And Ben does hit on the next turn, so he still is in the game. And there's actually a card in his hand that I really like here. If he can hit 2 more lands, this is a High Spire Mantis. And I do think if he can make his way up to that card, that is a way he could steal a game.
Yeah, Brian may not be able to answer it. And if he can block and trade enough with other stuff, there you go. It's something. It's a long shot, of course, but it is something at least.
All right, Highland game swings in. Ben does not want to trade it. Brian, unfortunately for Ben, is curving out here, which will make his job all that much harder.
And Ben can't really block because the more that he trades resources with Brian, the more that the effects of the mulligan are going to get magnified. So he kind of needs to play a non-interactive game to the extent that he can, but that's really hard to do with 2/2s for 2.
Right, he wants to race and hope to win the race, but right now the race is looking worse and worse every turn. Master Pearl swings, and Brian declines the trade as well. We'll see if Ben has a post-combat play. It's Briber's Purse on 1, or on 2, actually.
So that is the mulligan to 3.
If he had extra lands, it would be like then this card would be pretty decent.
I think this card's very underrated in aggressive decks, but this is unfortunate,
Yeah, he's never going to have the mana to activate that. You see Brian just continues the curve out, playing long shot squad on 4. And with 7 power to Ben's 2, things are getting sewn up pretty quickly.
In fairness here, I think it would have been challenging for Ben to beat this draw on 7 cards.
It has, and Ben's going to capitalize on the fact that his opponents have not gone 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop. Brian's deck can do that. Now, granted, some of these cards are Highland games. They're not particularly great cards, but they are cards that he is consistently casting.
All he wants to do is get to the spot where he starts to get to deploy his 5 and 6 mana creatures. That's it. And Highland game allows him to trade, gains 2 life on the way out. It's not glamorous, but it's a very important role player for Brian in this matchup.
Brian goes to attack. Ben is going to bribe off the long shot squad, so Brian will just swing with Highland game. And we'll see if Ben opts to trade. Doesn't. Yeah, he'll finally trade that with Highland game, it looks like.
Yeah, rock and a hard place kind of spot there where he doesn't want to trade resources, but at the same time, the face-up Master Pearl's worth very little in the face of a 3/3, so what are you going to do?
Brian's deck firing on all cylinders here. Plays a Summit Prowler and a tap land, has double of every color, hasn't missed a creature drop yet. He's been completely mana efficient every turn of this game.
It's been perfect. And not quite the follow-up that Ben needs in this spot.
Yeah, Monastery Swift Spear here. And he'll use the last counter on the purse now on Summit Prowler, but that means the purse will be empty as Ben goes down to 9.
And sure, why not, I guess.
Bear's Companion for Brian Braun-Duin. No land on Ben's side. And that should just about do it. Even if he blocks the bear, he's taking too much damage. But he's going to make Brian turn the creature sideways, at the very least.
I would have to assume this was Brian's easiest set of games so far during the day.
I would think so. 2-0. Brian Braun-Duin moves to 7-1, and with that, wins his way into day 2.
Congratulations to him, Brian, a player who, has been silver level pro, teetering around gold at various times, and early on in the season getting a good finish at a Grand Prix. He's going to Honolulu next weekend. Could set himself up for a deep run in the Pro Players Club this year, which is what he's been looking for a while now.